It was a bitter cold Christmas Eve in 1967, the kind of cold that sneaks into your bones and stays there, the snow falling thick and heavy over the rolling hills of rural Iowa, turning everything into a white blanket that hid the harshness of the world underneath. And I was 16 years old, standing on the cracked porch of our rundown farmhouse with a small suitcase in my hand, my breath coming out in frozen clouds as I watched my father slam the screen door behind him, his face redder than the holiday lights we'd barely bothered to string up that year, his eyes hard and unyielding like the frozen ground outside. "You're no daughter of mine," he spat, the words hitting me harder than any slap ever could, his voice carrying over the howling wind as he stomped down the steps toward his old Ford pickup, the engine already rumbling because he'd started it 10 minutes earlier when the argument had exploded into something irreversible. "Daddy, please," I begged, my voice cracking, tears freezing on my cheeks as I stepped forward, but he didn't even turn around, just yanked open the driver's door and climbed in, the truck's headlights cutting through the swirling snow like angry eyes. "You made your choice, girl," he yelled out the window before getting the engine, "running around with that no-good boy, getting yourself in trouble. Don't come crying to me when it all falls apart." And just like that, he drove off, the taillights disappearing down the long dirt road that led away from our farm, leaving me alone in the darkening evening, the Christmas tree visible through the window looking pathetic with its sparse ornaments, no presents underneath because money was tight and tempers were tighter. I stood there for what felt like hours, the snow piling up on my shoulders, my thin coat doing nothing against the cold, wondering how it had come to this. My name is Emily Harper. Or at least it was back then, growing up in a small town called Willow Creek, Iowa, where everybody knew everybody's business and secrets didn't stay secret for long, and my secret was that I was 3 months pregnant at 16, the father a boy named Tommy Jenkins who'd promised me the world one summer night in the back of his Chevy and then skipped town when I told him the news that my mother had died when I was 8, taken by cancer that ate her up quick, leaving just me and Dad, him working the fields from dawn till dusk, drinking too much at night, and me trying to keep the house running while going to school. But lately, the fights had gotten worse, him blaming me for everything from the failing crops to his loneliness, and tonight, when he'd found the pregnancy test I'd stupidly left in the bathroom trash, it all boiled over. He'd screamed about shame, about how I'd ruined the family name, about how he couldn't look at me anymore without seeing my mother's weakness in me, and no amount of pleading or promising to make it right changed his mind. So there I was, disowned on Christmas Eve, no money, no plan, just a suitcase with a few clothes and a couple of dollars I'd saved from babysitting. The wind picked up, whipping snow into my face, and I knew I couldn't stay on that porch all night. I'd freeze to death. So I started walking, down the same road Dad had taken, but slower, my boots crunching in the fresh snow, hoping maybe I'd hitch a ride to Des Moines or somewhere bigger where a girl like me could disappear and start over. But the road was empty, no cars out on a night like this, families tucked inside with their turkeys and presents, and after a mile or so, my legs were numb, my fingers too, and I was starting to think this was how it ended for me when I saw a faint light up ahead. A farmhouse set back from the road with a warm glow in the windows and smoke curling from the chimney. It wasn't much different from ours, but it looked welcoming, a big barn beside it and fields stretching out white and endless, and something pulled me toward it, maybe desperation, maybe instinct, so I trudged up the long driveway, my suitcase dragging behind me, and knocked on the door with a frozen hand. The door opened after a moment, and there stood an older man, maybe in his 60s, tall and weathered like an old oak tree, with gray hair under a wool cap and kind blue eyes that widened a bit when he saw me standing there half frozen. "Good Lord, child, what are you doing out in this storm?" he said, his voice deep and warm like hot cider. Please, sir, I managed through chattering teeth. My father kicked me out. I don't have anywhere to go. He didn't hesitate, just stepped aside and ushered me in. Come on in before you turn into an icicle. Name's Harlan Whitaker. This here's my farm. The heat hit me like a wave, the smell of pine from a real Christmas tree in the corner and something baking in the oven making my stomach growl. I hadn't eaten since morning. Sit by the fire, he said, taking my suitcase and coat, hanging them up as I collapsed into a rocking chair near the stone fireplace, the flames dancing and thawing my limbs. That he brought me a mug of hot chocolate, thick and rich, with marshmallows floating on top, and a blanket to wrap around myself. Now, tell me what happened, if you want to, he said, sitting across from me in his own chair, not pushing but open, and something about his quiet kindness broke me. I told him everything, the pregnancy, the fight, Dad driving off, leaving out no details because I was too tired and scared to hold back. That he listened without interrupting, just nodding now and then, his face thoughtful. That's a heavy load for a young girl, he said when I finished, voice gentle. I'm sorry to bother you on Christmas Eve, I whispered, ashamed now that the warmth was bringing back some sense. Nonsense. My wife's been gone 10 years now, no kids of our own, house gets lonely this time of year. You staying here tonight, no arguments. And just like that, Harlan Whitaker took me in, a stranger off the road, no questions about repayment or judgment about my mistakes. That he gave me the guest room upstairs, clean and cozy with a quilt on the bed, and even found an old nightgown of his wife's that fit me well enough. The next morning, Christmas Day, I woke to the smell of bacon and eggs, and downstairs Harlan had set the table for two, with pancakes and fresh orange juice, and a small present wrapped under the tree for me, a pair of warm mittens he'd apparently had stashed away. Merry Christmas, Emily, he said with a smile, and for the first time in years, it felt like one. That over the weeks that followed, I stayed on, helping around the farm as best I could with my growing belly, milking the cows, feeding the chickens, cleaning the house, Harlan insisting I take it easy but glad for the company. He was a widower, his wife Clara dying from a heart attack young, and he'd poured everything into the farm, 200 acres of prime Iowa land, corn and soybeans mostly, with some livestock. It turned out he was well off, not flashy but comfortable. The farm paid off and savings from good years. That he never pried too much into my past, but he listened when I needed to talk, sharing stories of his own life. How he'd met Clara at a county fair, their dreams of a big family that never happened. We fell into a rhythm, him teaching me things I'd never learned from Dad, like how to drive the tractor or bake real apple pie from scratch, and as my pregnancy progressed, he even drove me to the doctor in town, waiting in the truck without complaint. People in Willow Creek talked, of course. Small town gossip flying about the old farmer taking in a pregnant teenager. But Harlan didn't care, telling anyone who asked that I was family now. Spring came, the snow melting into mud, fields turning green, and in April, I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, Sarah, in the county hospital, Harlan pacing the waiting room like a proud grandfather. When we brought her home, he held her tiny hand and teared up a bit. She's got your eyes, he said, and from then on, he was Grandpa Harlan to her, spoiling her with toys from the catalog and rocking her to sleep when I was exhausted. The years blurred by. Sarah growing up running through the fields, learning to ride horses on Harlan's old mare, me finishing high school through correspondence courses and then taking classes at the community college in town. Harlan paying for it all without making a big deal. He updated his will quietly, I found out later, making provisions for us, but he never mentioned it. Just lived each day grateful for the noise and life we'd brought to his quiet farm. Dad never came looking. As far as I knew, rumors said he'd sold our old place and moved to Florida with some woman, starting over without a backward glance. But we built a new life. Harlan teaching Sarah about planting seasons and hard work, me working part-time at the local library. The three of us a strange but perfect little family. Christmas became special again, big. Dinners with turkey and all the trimmings, presents piled high, Harlan always hanging Clara's old stockings along with new ones for me and Sarah. Time passed. Sarah starting school, excelling in everything. Harlan getting older, his steps slower, arthritis in his hands. But his spirit strong, always planning the next harvest. Then, last month, Harlan passed peacefully in his sleep at 85. The doctor saying his heart just gave out after a long, good life. The funeral was small but heartfelt. Folks from town coming to pay respects to a man who'd helped so many quietly over the years, and yesterday, the lawyer called me into his office, reading Harlan's will in full. For the first time, I learned the extent of it, the entire estate, the 200 acres, the house, the savings, everything left to me, Emily Harper, with a trust set up for Sarah's college and beyond. Valued at over $2 million in today's market, there was a letter too, in Harlan's careful handwriting. Dear Emily, you came to me a scared girl on a stormy night, and you gave me the family I always wanted. This farm is yours now, take care of it, and remember, blood ain't always what makes family. Love, Harlan. I sat there crying, thinking back to that Christmas Eve 58 years ago when I thought my life was over, and how one kind farmer changed everything. Today, standing on the same porch where Harlan first welcomed me, snow falling softly again, Sarah beside me with her own little ones, I feel grateful beyond words. That disowned girl became the heir to a legacy of love, and if this story touched you, the full incredible journey with all the twists, the heartbreaks, the triumphs, and even the mysteries that unfolded over the decades is told in detail on my YouTube channel. And hit that subscribe button for more true stories from the heartland that'll keep you hooked. New videos every day, notifications on so you don't miss the next one. As I stood there on Harlan's porch that first Christmas morning, the sun peeking through the clouds and glittering off the fresh snow like a million tiny diamonds scattered across the Iowa landscape, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of grief and hope washing over me, the kind of feeling that only comes when your whole world has shattered and something new is quietly piecing itself together in the ruins. Harlan handed me a cup of coffee, black and strong the way he liked it, and we sat on the old wooden swing, creaking gently as we rocked, watching the cattle and the far pasture huddle together against the cold. You ever milked a cow, Emily? He asked, his voice breaking the silence, not prying into my pain but offering something practical, something to do with my hands so my mind wouldn't drown. He didn't wait for an answer, just stood up and motioned for me to follow him to the barn, where the air was warm and thick with the smell of hay and animals, and he showed me how to sit on the little stool, how to gentle the cow named Bessie with soft words before wrapping my frozen fingers around the teats and pulling in that steady rhythm that soon had warm milk streaming into the pail. That it was simple work, but it grounded me, made me feel useful instead of broken, and by the time we'd finished with the 6 cows and fed the chickens, my cheeks were flushed from the effort and the cold, and Harlan nodded approvingly. Good hands, he said. You'll do just fine here if you decide to stay a spell. I didn't know then that a spell would turn into a lifetime, but in those first weeks, as the snow kept falling and the road stayed drifted shut, I had no choice but to settle in. Harlan gave me chores that matched my strength, gathering eggs, sweeping the kitchen, peeling potatoes for supper, and in return he fed me hearty meals, venison stew and cornbread, apple dumplings from the fruit he'd canned himself. And he never once made me feel like charity that I'd catch him watching me sometimes with a thoughtful look, especially when I hummed old hymns while washing dishes, songs my mother used to sing, and one evening he cleared his throat and said, "Clara used to sing those same tunes. House has been too quiet without M." That's when I learned more about his loss, how Clara had been the light of his life, a schoolteacher from town who'd married a farmer against her parents' wishes, how they'd tried for years to have children but it never happened, doctors saying something about her insides after a bad case of scarlet fever as a child that they'd made do with just each other, building this farm into something solid. Until one morning 10 years ago she clutched her chest at the breakfast table and was gone before the ambulance even reached the county road. Harlan had buried himself in work after that, rarely going into Willow Creek except for feed or church on Sundays, and folks said he'd turned hard, but with me there he softened, bit by bit, like ice melting in spring. That he fixed up the spare room proper, digging out boxes of Clara's things, dresses that were a little big but warm, a pair of boots that fit me better than my old ones. Even a small jewelry box with a silver locket he said I could wear if I liked. And when my morning sickness hit hard in January, he brewed ginger tea from a recipe Clara had used for her students and sat with me on the porch while I sipped it, telling stories about growing up during the Depression, how his family had lost their farm but his daddy never stopped believing tomorrow could be better. Those stories stuck with me, made me think maybe my tomorrow could be better too. Even with a baby on the way and no father in sight, February brought a thaw, then another freeze, and one afternoon a knock came at the door. It was Mrs. Larson from church, the biggest gossip in Willow Creek, bringing a casserole and pretending concern while her eyes darted around looking for scandal. Harlan met her on the porch, took the dish politely, and said, "Appreciate the kindness, ma'am, but Emily here's helping me out this winter, and we're managing just fine." He shut the door firm but gentle, and when he came back in he just shrugged. "Folks'll talk. Always do. Don't let it bother you." But it did bother me some, because soon whispers reached even our isolated farm, people saying Harlan was keeping a wayward girl, wondering if the baby was his, cruel things that made my cheeks burn. And then in March, another knock, louder this time, and when Harlan opened it there stood my father, Jack Harper, his face weathered and thinner than I remembered, his eyes bloodshot like he'd been drinking the whole drive from wherever he'd gone that Christmas night. "I'm here for my daughter," he said gruffly, not even looking at me standing behind Harlan in the hallway. "She's coming home." My heart pounded, part of me wanting to run to him, to believe he'd come to forgive, but another part remembering his cruel words, the way he'd left me in the snow. Harlan didn't move from the doorway. "Emily's welcome to stay here as long as she needs," he said calmly. "But if she wants to go with you, that's her choice." Dad finally looked at me, his gaze dropping to my rounding belly, and something flickered across his face, regret maybe, or just more anger. "You shamed me, girl," he muttered. "Shamed your mother's memory. But blood's blood. Pack your things." I stepped forward, my voice steadier than I felt. "No, Daddy. You said I wasn't your daughter anymore. You meant it then, and I can't go back to that." Tears welled in his eyes, the first I'd ever seen from him, but he blinked them away fast. "Fine. Rot here then." He turned and left, truck roaring down the driveway, and I collapsed sobbing in Harlan's arms, not sure if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life or the bravest decision, but Harlan held me up, murmuring, "You did right by yourself and that baby. Proud of you." Spring exploded across the farm that year, redbuds blooming pink along the creek, fields turning black and rich as Harlan plowed them with his old International tractor, and I waddled alongside planting rows of garden vegetables, tomatoes, sweet corn, green beans, my belly growing bigger every day. Sarah arrived on a warm April evening in 1968, the same week the nation mourned Martin Luther King Jr., the TV showing riots in cities far away while I labored in the small hospital 20 miles down the road. Harlan drove me there himself, gripping the wheel white-knuckled, and when the nurse brought out that tiny pink bundle with a tuft of dark hair, he took one look and whispered, "She's perfect." We brought her home to the farmhouse that already felt like ours, and Harlan hung a wooden swing on the big oak tree for her one day, even though she'd be years before using it, saying every child needed a place to dream. He was there for every milestone, her first smile, first tooth, first steps across the kitchen floor, and folks in town slowly changed their tune when they saw how he doted on her, calling her Little Missy, and carving wooden toys in his workshop. As the 70s rolled in, with gas shortages and disco music on the radio, Sarah started kindergarten, riding the bus from the end of our long driveway, and I took classes at night, earning my high school diploma and then starting nursing school because babies and caring for people felt like something I understood. Harlan paid the tuition without being asked, saying it was an investment in Sarah's future to have an educated mama. And when I graduated as an LPN in 1976, he threw a party right there on the farm, grilled steaks, homemade ice cream, half the town showing up to celebrate. The years kept turning, Sarah excelling in school, playing basketball for Willow Creek High, dating a nice boy named Mark who helped with hay baling every summer, while Harlan aged gracefully, his hair going white but his back still straight. I nursed at the local clinic, then the hospital in Des Moines when Sarah went off to Iowa State in 1986, studying agriculture because she loved the land as much as Harlan did. We lost touch with my father completely. He'd moved to Arizona, remarried, had stepkids he treated better from what little news trickled back, and I made peace with it, focusing on the family I'd found. Then came the 90s, the farm booming with higher corn prices, Harlan modernizing a bit with new equipment but keeping the old ways too, teaching Sarah everything he knew so she could take over one day. She married Mark in 1994. A beautiful June wedding in the barn we decorated with wildflowers, Harlan walking her down the aisle in his best suit, eyes misty as he gave her away. Their first child, my grandson Caleb, arrived in 1997, and Harlan held him the same tender way he'd held Sarah, whispering promises to teach him tractor driving someday. Life felt full, rich like the black Iowa soil, until the fall of 2025 when Harlan started tiring easier, napping in his chair by the window overlooking the fields he'd worked his whole life. One October morning I found him there, coffee gone cold beside him, peaceful as if asleep but gone all the same. The grief hit hard, like losing a father all over again. Only this time the one who'd actually chosen me. We buried him next to Clara in the little cemetery outside town, Sarah and Mark and the grandkids all there, the minister reading from Psalms about the righteous man walking in integrity, and then came the reading of the will, in the lawyer's office downtown, me expecting maybe a little something for Sarah's kids, but when Mr. Jenkins opened the folder his eyes widened slightly. To Emily Harper, he read, who came to me as a stranger in need and became the daughter I never had. I leave my entire estate, the farmhouse, the 200 acres, all equipment, savings accounts, investments, everything in total trust until her passing, then to be divided equally among her descendants, with special provision that the land remain farmed and never sold to developers. The value, he said quietly, was substantial, over $3 million with land prices these days. And there was the letter I'd read through tears, Harlan's words about family being chosen, not born, that I drove home that day, my home now, truly, and stood on the porch as snow began to fall again, December coming early this year, thinking about that Christmas Eve 58 years ago when I thought I had nothing, and how God or fate or simple human kindness had given me everything instead. Sarah and the kids will keep the farm going, raising corn and kids the way Harlan taught us, and I'll sit on that swing he hung, watching another generation grow strong under these wide Iowa skies. This story, my story, is one of redemption, of second chances, of love that shows up when you least expect it and changes everything. And if you're still here listening, heart full from this journey through the decades, please do me a huge favor. Head over to my YouTube channel, Olive Stories, right now, hit that red subscribe button, turn on the bell for notifications, because I've got dozens more stories just like this one. True tales from real folks across the American heartland, stories that'll make you laugh, cry, and remember what really matters. New video drops every day, and the next one is the full detailed account of what happened when my long-lost father showed up again in 1998, begging forgiveness with a secret that changed everything. You won't want to miss it. Subscribe today and join us. Keeping these stories alive. The days after Harlan's funeral blurred together like the snow flurries that kept sweeping across the Iowa fields in that cold November of 2025. Sarah and Mark handling most of the arrangements while I sat in Harlan's old rocking chair by the window, staring out at the stripped corn stubble poking through the white, remembering every conversation we'd ever had in that exact spot. How he'd point out the red-tailed hawks circling overhead or tell me which clouds meant rain was coming, his voice steady and sure like the land itself that I kept expecting to hear his boots thumping on the porch, his gruff "Emily, you making coffee yet?" echoing through the house. But the silence was heavy, broken only by the grandkids running in and out, their laughter both a comfort and a knife twist because Harlan would have loved watching Caleb and little Grace chase each other around the barn. The lawyer, Mr. Jenkins, whose father had handled Harlan's affairs back in the 70s, called me again a week later to go over the finer details, and that's when the real surprises started coming. That he spread papers across the kitchen table, the same table where Harlan and I had shared thousands of meals, and explained that the estate wasn't just the land and house I'd expected. There were investment accounts Harlan had quietly built over decades, selling off small parcels in the 80s only to reinvest in stocks and bonds, conservative choices that had grown steadily even through the crashes of 2008 and the pandemic. There was life insurance, mineral rights on part of the back 40 that some energy company had been leasing for years, and even a college fund he'd started for Sarah back when she was in diapers that had matured into enough to pay for all three grandkids' educations without touching the principal. But the biggest shock came when Mr. Jenkins slid a sealed envelope across to me, thick cream paper with my name written in Harlan's careful script. "He asked me to give you this separately," the lawyer said softly, gathering his other papers and leaving me alone with it. That I sat there a long time before opening it, my hands shaking, because I knew whatever was inside would be Harlan's final words to me, and I wasn't sure I was ready. The letter was long, 3 pages front and back, dated just a month before he passed. "Dear Emily, if you're reading this, I've gone to join Clara, and I'm guessing you're feeling like the world's a little emptier without an old man grumbling around the place. Don't you grieve too hard. I had more good years than most, and the best of them started that Christmas Eve when a half-frozen girl knocked on my door and brought life back into this house. You gave me a daughter when I thought I'd never have one, and a granddaughter, and now great-grandchildren who climb on my tractor like I once climbed on my daddy's. I never told you enough how grateful I was, so I'm telling you now. Every sunrise I watched from this porch since 1967 was brighter because you were part of it. There's things I need to explain, things I kept quiet because they didn't matter until now. Back in 1972, when you were working nights at the hospital and Sarah was 4, your daddy showed up here again. He was sober that time, looked like life had knocked him around pretty good. Said he'd divorced that woman in Florida, was working construction in Arizona, and the guilt was eating him alive. Wanted to see you, to apologize that he sat right where you're probably sitting now, had in his hands, and told me he'd been wrong to throw you out, that losing you made him realize what a fool he'd been. I told him you'd built a good life, that you were happy, and if he came back it had to be on your terms, not his, that he left without seeing you that time, but he wrote letters, dozen or more over the years, that I kept in the top drawer of my desk. I never gave them to you because you'd said you were done looking back, and I respected that. But they're there if you ever want them. There's one more thing, the hardest part. In 1998, the year Sarah got married, he came again. Cancer, he said, lungs, spread everywhere. Doctors gave him months. He had no one else, Emily. I let him stay in the old bunkhouse out back for those last 6 weeks. We didn't tell you because you were so busy with the wedding, and he begged me not to burden you. That he watched the ceremony from a distance, standing at the edge of the field in his Sunday suit, too proud or too ashamed to come closer. He cried when you danced with Mark's father, said it should have been him giving you away. Told me you'd grown into the kind of woman your mother would have been proud of. He passed in October that year, quiet, in his sleep just like I hoped to. We buried him next to your mama in the Willow Creek Cemetery, paid for a stone that just says Jack Harper, beloved father, because that's what he wanted to be remembered as, even if he failed at it sometimes. That he left everything he had to you, a small savings account, about $20,000 back then, and a box of your mother's things he'd kept all those years. I added his money to the farm accounts and never touched the box. It's in the attic, labeled with your name. That I kept these secrets because you deserved peace, but now the choice is yours. Read the letters, open the box, or let them stay closed. Either way, know that forgiveness isn't weakness, and neither is choosing to move on. That I love you like my own blood, Emily. Always have, always will. Take care of the land, take care of our girl and those babies, and every Christmas Eve light an extra candle for an old farmer who got lucky one snowy night. All my love, Harlan. That I read it 3 times before the tears made the words swim, then climbed the attic stairs on shaky legs, finding the dusty box right where he said. Inside were my mother's wedding ring, her Bible with pressed flowers still between the pages, childhood photos of me I thought were lost forever, and a stack of letters tied with twine, my father's handwriting on every envelope. Some I opened that night, some I couldn't yet. Apologies, regrets, small stories of his lonely years, pride in hearing through town gossip that I'd become a nurse, that Sarah was valedictorian. But one letter, the last one dated just days before he died, broke me wide open. Tell Emily I was wrong about everything except one thing. I always loved her. Wish I'd shown it better. If she can find it in her heart to forgive an old fool, I'll rest easy. I drove to the cemetery the next morning, snow crunching under my boots, and stood at his grave for the first time in decades, brushing frost off the stone Harlan had bought. I forgive you, Daddy, I whispered to the wind. And I hope you found peace. Sarah found me there, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and we stood together until the cold drove us home. Christmas came quiet that year, no big party. Just family gathered around the tree Harlan had always insisted on cutting himself from the back pasture. We hung his favorite ornament, a wooden tractor he'd carved the year Sarah was born, and told stories late into the night. The kids wide-eyed hearing about the stranger who became their great-grandpa. The farm feels different now, bigger. With possibility, Sarah and Mark are expanding the operation, adding organic fields and agritourism, pumpkin patches in fall, a corn maze, school tours in spring. So the land keeps giving while staying in the family that I turned 74 this past summer. Still healthy enough to drive the tractor when Caleb begs for rides. Still baking Harlan's favorite apple pie recipe that Clara handed down. We've even started a scholarship at the high school in Harlan's name, for kids who need a second chance. Because that's what he believed in most. Tonight, December 15, 2025, snow is falling thick again, just like that fateful Christmas Eve 58 years ago. And I'm sitting on the porch wrapped in the quilt Clara made, watching the flakes dance under the yard light, feeling Harlan close somehow, like he's just inside making coffee, and I know without a doubt that the greatest inheritance he left wasn't the land or the money. It was the lesson that family is built on kindness shown in the hardest moments, on doors opened when they could have stayed shut, on love chosen day after day. This is only part of the story. There are so many more layers, the years of drought and flood, the night the barn burned in '83 and how the whole town showed up to rebuild, the secret Harlan kept about finding Tommy Jenkins years later and what he said to him, the way Sarah almost left the farm for city life before coming back, all the heartaches and triumphs that make up a real life here in America's heartland. That if you've been touched by this journey so far, if it stirred something in your own heart about family, forgiveness, and the quiet miracles that happen on ordinary farms, then please come join me on my YouTube channel, Olive Stories, where I'm sharing the full, unfiltered story in daily videos, complete with old photographs, home movies Harlan took on his 8mm camera, even recipes and farm tours. Subscribe right now. Hit that bell so you never miss an update, because I'm finally opening the rest of those letters from my father and sharing what they revealed about my mother's hidden past that even Harlan never knew. There are tears, laughter, and twists you won't see coming. Opening that attic box and reading Harlan's final letter felt like stepping through a door I'd kept locked for decades. One that led straight back into parts of my past I thought I'd buried deep enough to never unearth again. But there I was on a cold afternoon in late November 2025, sitting cross-legged on the dusty attic floor surrounded by old trunks and holiday decorations, sorting through my mother's things one item at a time as if handling fragile glass. The wedding ring was first, a simple gold band worn thin from years of work, the inside engraved with Jack and Ruth 1948, in tiny script that made my throat tighten because I'd never seen her wear it after I was about 10, said it didn't fit anymore, but I suspect it was because the love had worn out long before the metal did. Next came the Bible, leather cover cracked, pages soft as cloth. And tucked between Psalms and Proverbs were those pressed wildflowers, violets and Queen Anne's lace, from walks she and I used to take along the creek before she got sick, her voice soft telling me their names and how Grandma had taught her the same. That I opened to the family record pages in the front, expecting the usual births and deaths, but there was an entry I'd never seen, written in my mother's careful hand, Emily Ruth Harper, born September 12, 1951, to Ruth Marie Harper and Father Unknown. Father Unknown, the words hit me like a slap. That I stared at them until the ink blurred, my birth date correct but everything else wrong. Daddy had always been listed as Jack Harper on every paper I'd ever seen, my birth certificate, school records, everything, and yet here, in Mom's private Bible, the truth stared back at me. Jack Harper was not my biological father. That I sat frozen, the attic cold seeping through my jeans, mind racing back through memories trying to make sense of it. Why had Mom married him if I wasn't his? Had he known? Was that why he'd always been so hard, holding some secret resentment? Or had Mom hidden it from everyone, including him? Downstairs I could hear Sarah in the kitchen starting supper, the grandkids laughing over a board game, normal life going on while mine tilted on its axis again. That I gathered the Bible and the stack of Jack's letters and carried them down, pouring myself a stiff cup of coffee before sitting at the table to read more. His letters spanned years, starting in 1972 like Harlan said, full of awkward apologies at first, then longer updates about his life, jobs he'd taken, places he'd lived, always circling back to regret for that Christmas Eve, saying drink and pride had spoken louder than love. But in the later ones, after 1990, the tone changed, became confessional. He wrote about finding Mom's old letters after she died, hidden in a shoebox in their closet. Love letters from a young man named Thomas Caldwell, a soldier stationed near Des Moines in 1950 on leave from Korea. Jack had married Mom in '49 when she was already 3 months pregnant with me, knowing the baby wasn't his but loving her enough, or maybe desperately enough, to claim me anyway. He wrote that he'd tried to be a good father, but the knowledge ate at him over the years, especially when I started looking less like him and more like the faded photo of Thomas he'd found tucked in Mom's things. Dark hair, blue eyes, a crooked smile I see in the mirror every day. He said the fight in 1967 wasn't really about Tommy Jenkins or the pregnancy. It was the old wound ripping open, seeing history repeat and fearing I'd end up abandoned like Mom almost was. But instead of protecting me, he'd pushed me away in anger and shame. His last letter, the one from 1998, ended with, "I ain't your blood, Emily, but I raised you and I loved you the best I knew how. If that counts for anything, I hope someday you'll think of me as Dad again." I cried until my eyes burned, then called Sarah into the kitchen and showed her everything, watching her face shift from confusion to shock to tears as she read the entries. We sat up half the night talking it through. How this explains so much: Jack's distance, his explosive temper, why Mom had seemed sad even on good days, why he'd never been able to say, "I love you" easy like other fathers. But it also made his choice to marry Mom and raise me even braver, a quiet act of love buried under years of hurt. The next morning I drove to the courthouse in town, pulled my original birth certificate, and there it was, Father listed as Jack Harper, his signature bold and clear, claiming me legally even if not biologically. Sarah asked what I wanted to do with the information, if I wanted to find out more about Thomas Caldwell, but I thought about it long and hard and decided some doors are better left closed. Mom had chosen Jack to be my father, Harlan had chosen me as his daughter, and blood had proven time and again to be the least important part of family. Still, life kept surprising us. That I in Harlan's letter he'd mentioned one more secret. The night the barn burned in 1983, that I'd always thought it was lightning, a summer storm that hit fast and fierce, taking the old hay barn and nearly the cattle with it, the whole town turning out with buckets and hoses to save what they could. But Harlan wrote that it was arson, set by Tommy Jenkins, the boy who'd gotten me pregnant and skipped town. Tommy had come back to Willow Creek in '82, down on his luck, gambling debts in Chicago, thinking he could blackmail Harlan for money by threatening to tell the town I'd been a loose girl and Sarah wasn't legitimate. Harlan refused, told him to leave and never come back. But Tommy came back drunk one night and torched the barn as revenge. The sheriff suspected but couldn't prove it, and Harlan paid him a visit instead. Drove to Des Moines, found Tommy in a bar, and in Harlan's words, had a conversation the boy never forgot. Tommy left Iowa for good after that, ended up in California, and Harlan never told me to spare me the pain, but he'd kept a newspaper clipping from 2015, Tommy's obituary, dead at 67 from liver failure, no family listed. That I burned that clipping in the fireplace that night, letting the last shadow of him go up in smoke. The holidays approached fast, and we decided to honor Harlan by opening the farm to the community for the first time. a Christmas Eve open house with cocoa and cookies, hayrides under the stars, the big tree in the yard lit up like it hadn't been since Clara's day. Folks came in droves, neighbors who'd known Harlan for decades, young families new to the area, even some who remembered me as that pregnant teenager who'd landed on his doorstep. They brought casseroles and stories, laughing about how Harlan once fixed the church roof for free or quietly paid a widow's property taxes one hard year. By the fire pit we told the truth for the first time, that Harlan had taken in a scared girl and made her family, that he'd left everything to us not out of obligation but love, and people listened with tears in their eyes, saying it was the best Christmas story they'd ever heard. Sarah and Mark announced that night they're expecting again, another great-grandchild for Harlan's legacy, and Caleb, now 16 himself, asked if he could start a memorial scholarship fund with part of the estate money for kids aging out of foster care, because Grandpa Harlan knew what it was like to choose family. We said yes, of course, hearts full. As midnight neared, snow started falling soft and steady, just like that night in 1967, and I stepped out onto the porch alone for a moment, the voices and music fading behind me. I lit 2 candles in the window, one for Harlan and Clara, one for Mom and Jack, and whispered thank you to whichever angels had guided a freezing girl to the right door all those years ago. Because out of the worst moment of my life came the best, the farm, the family, the forgiveness, the future. And standing there watching the snow blanket the fields that are now truly mine, I know the story isn't over. It's being written every day by Sarah's children and theirs after them, on this same Iowa soil that holds so many secrets and so much love. If this journey through heartbreak and healing, through secrets revealed after decades and love that outlasted every storm has meant something to you, if it's reminded you that second chances are real and family is what we decide it to be, then I invite you, no, I beg you, to come join our growing family on YouTube. Search Olive Stories, and hit that subscribe button today. And share comments that feel like letters from old friends, and I read every one. So please subscribe, turn on notifications, share with someone who needs hope this holiday season. We save seats around the virtual fireplace for all of you. With the secrets of the attic finally laid bare and the Christmas Eve open house behind us, the new year of 2026 crept in quiet and cold, the kind of Iowa winter where the wind cuts straight through your coat and the sky stays the color of steel for weeks on end. But inside the farmhouse the wood stove crackled steady and the smells of baking bread and simmering chili kept the chill at bay as we settled into life without Harlan's physical presence yet with his spirit in every corner. Sarah and Mark moved into the big bedroom downstairs to make things easier for me with my knees starting to complain about stairs, and we turned Harlan's old room into a nursery for the new baby expected in June, painting the walls a soft yellow and hanging the same mobile of wooden farm animals he'd carved for Sarah back in the 60s. Caleb took over more of the daily chores, up before dawn to feed the cattle and check fences, driving the old John Deere like he was born to it, and little Grace followed him around like a shadow, bundling up in coveralls 2 sizes too big, asking 1,000 questions about why the cows have numbers on their ear tags and whether the chickens dreamed. That I spent my days sorting through decades of farm records in Harlan's office, a small room off the kitchen lined with shelves of ledgers going back to the 40s, each one filled with his neat columns of planting dates, yields, rainfall, expenses, and little notes in the margins: good corn year, drought hurt soybeans, Clara's best apple crop yet, and I realized just how much history was bound up in those pages. Not just numbers but a life measured in seasons. As I worked I let my mind drift back to the hardest stretches, the years that tested us most, because those are the ones that forged us strongest, starting with the 70s when everything seemed to be falling apart at once for the whole country and for us too. The first big blow came in 1973 with the oil embargo, gas prices shooting up overnight and lines at the pump stretching for blocks. But out here in farm country the real pain was fertilizer and diesel tripling in cost just when corn prices were decent for once. Harlan sat at this same desk night after night running numbers, figuring how to stretch what we had. And one evening he looked up at me with worry deep in his eyes and said we might have to sell off the back 80 to make it through. That I was 22 then. Sarah a busy 5-year-old, and I just started nursing school part-time. But I told him no, we'd find another way. So we tightened everywhere. No new clothes, patched tires instead of buying new. I took extra shifts at the diner on weekends, and Harlan started custom baling hay for neighbors who couldn't afford their own equipment, working from sunup to way past sundown in 100-degree heat. But the real savior came unexpected. A letter from the VA saying Harlan qualified for a disability pension because of shrapnel still in his knee from Korea, something he'd never applied for because real men don't take handouts. I filled out the forms myself, forged his signature when he grumbled too much, and when that first check came he stared at it a long time, then handed it to me saying, "Put it toward the land payment, Emily. Pride don't pay bills." We made it through that year, and the next, and by 1979 when interest rates hit 20% and farms all around us were going under at auction, Harlan looked at me across the table and said, "We're still here because of you, girl. Stubborn as mules, both of us." The 80s brought new challenges. The farm crisis hit Iowa like a tornado. Land values crashing, banks foreclosing left and right, and we watched good families we'd known forever load up trucks and leave for the cities with nothing but what fit in the bed. One night in 1985 a neighbor we'd baled hay with for years put a shotgun in his mouth rather than lose the place his granddaddy homesteaded, and Harlan came in from the funeral white as a sheet, sat in his chair without a word, and I knew he was thinking about Clara's dream of keeping this farm whole. So when the bank sent a letter offering to refinance at a lower rate but wanting more collateral, Harlan was ready to sign over part of the timber along the creek. But I stopped him. I'd been reading in nursing journals about government programs for set-asides, taking marginal land out of production for conservation payments. And I drove to the ASCS office myself and filled out every form they had. We enrolled 40 acres of the hilliest ground in the CRP program, planted it to native grasses and trees, and those checks plus my full-time nursing salary at the hospital kept the wolves from the door. The barn fire came in the summer of '83, right in the middle of all that, a night I'll never forget, lightning storm rolling in fast, thunder shaking the windows, and suddenly the sky lit up orange over the ridge. I ran outside in my nightgown, Harlan already ahead of me yelling for buckets, and we fought that blaze alongside neighbors who came running from miles around, passing water hand to hand until the fire department finally got there. But the old barn was gone, hay, tools, the tractor Harlan's daddy had bought new in 1952, everything reduced to smoking ruins. We stood there at dawn covered in soot, Harlan's face streaked with tears he didn't bother hiding, and I thought that might be the breaking point. But the next morning folks started showing up, trucks pulling trailers of lumber, women with casseroles and coffee, the Amish community from over by Kelowna bringing hand-hewn beams. And in 3 weeks we had a new barn raising, bigger and better, metal roof this time so lightning wouldn't take it again. Harlan walked around shaking hands, voice thick, saying over and over, "Didn't know I had this many friends." And I told him he'd earned every one by helping others first all those years. That was the miracle of rural America in hard times. When one falls, the rest lift, because we know tomorrow it could be us. I only learned years later from Harlan's letter that it wasn't lightning at all, that Tommy Jenkins had come crawling back looking for easy money and turned vicious when Harlan sent him packing. But in the moment we needed to believe in accidents and community, not malice. And maybe that belief is what kept us standing. Then came the flood of 1993. The year the Raccoon River and every creek around turned into raging monsters after rains that wouldn't stop for weeks. Our fields were lakes, corn drowned before it knee-high, and the road to town washed out so bad we were stranded for days. Harlan and I sandbagged the house with help from Mark, who was courting Sarah serious by then. And when the water finally receded, we lost half the crop, but the house and barn stood dry. We applied for disaster aid, got enough to replant late soybeans, and that fall brought a bumper crop that paid off the last of the operating loan we'd carried since the 70s. Harlan took me out to dinner in Des Moines that night. First time we'd eaten in a restaurant that didn't have a lunch counter in years, and raised his glass of sweet tea saying, "To surviving, Emily. And to whatever comes next." The 90s eased up some, corn prices better, new hybrids yielding more, and Sarah graduating college with a degree in AG business, coming home to farm full-time with Mark while I cut back hours at the hospital to help with grandbabies. The new century brought its own shocks. 9/11 hitting us hard even out here. Watching those towers fall on TV while combining corn, feeling like the world had gone mad. Then the wars that followed reminding Harlan too much of Korea. He'd sit on the porch in the evening staring at the flag we flew every day, saying young men shouldn't have to fight old men's battles. And when Caleb was born in 2008 during the financial crash, we worried again about banks and loans but held tight. Diversified into direct-to-consumer beef and sweet corn sales at the farmers market in Des Moines. The pandemic in 2020 was strange. Isolated anyway on the farm but missing church potlucks and county fair, wearing masks to the feed store, Zoom calls with Sarah teaching the kids when schools closed. But we stayed healthy, planted victory gardens bigger than ever, and shared eggs and vegetables with neighbors who'd lost jobs in town. Looking back across all those decades from this desk in 2026, I see the pattern clear. Every crisis that could have broken us instead bent us just enough to grow stronger. Because Harlan taught me early that land isn't just dirt, it's promise, and family isn't just blood. It's choice renewed every morning when you get up and do the work. And now, with the estate settled, taxes paid thanks to Harlan's careful planning, and the farm debt-free for the first time since the 30s, Sarah and Mark are dreaming big. Solar panels on the new machine shed, cover crops and no-till to build the soil, maybe even a small creamery for artisan cheese from our herd. Caleb talks about agricultural engineering school. Grace wants to be a veterinarian. And the new baby due this summer will grow up never knowing a mortgage payment or the fear of auction. Signs that I still drive into town twice a week to volunteer at the clinic. Still bake Harlan's favorite oatmeal raisin cookies for the grandkids. Still light those 2 candles every Christmas Eve. One for the family I was born to, one for the family that chose me. And some evenings when the sunset paints the sky gold over the fields Harlan worked his whole life. I swear I feel him beside me on the porch swing, quiet and content. Knowing the story he started that snowy night in 1967 is still being written in good hands. That if you've stayed with me this far through all the hard years and the triumphs that followed, if these memories of real American farm life, its struggles, its stubborn hope, its deep roots, have touched something in you, then please don't stop here. Come over to my YouTube channel, Olive Stories, where every day I'm sharing more old home movies digitized, recipes from Clara's handwritten book, interviews with neighbors who helped raise that barn. Search Olive Stories right now, hit subscribe, ring that bell. The years after little Harlan's birth settled into a gentle rhythm that felt both brand new and as old as the land itself, morning starting with the baby's cries echoing through the house the way Sarah's once did and mine never had in my own childhood home, the smell of coffee brewing while Mark headed out to check the calving cows and Caleb fired up the planter for the early corn ground that had dried out just enough after a wet spring. Grace took to her new role as big sister with fierce protectiveness, carrying the baby around like a treasure, showing him the chickens and the barn cats and whispering secrets to him about how Grandpa Harlan was watching from somewhere, making sure the wind didn't blow too hard on planting day. I watched it all from the kitchen window, sometimes my hands idle and the dishwater longer than necessary, just soaking in the sight of 4 generations now moving across this farm, the circle wider and stronger than I ever dared dream. That Christmas Eve, when I thought I had lost everything forever. By the summer of 2027, the pollinator strips we'd planted were alive with butterflies and bees, the air humming in the heat, and the milkweeds standing tall with their pink crowns drawing monarchs by the dozens, just like in the old days before chemicals and clean fence rows chased them away. Sarah entered our honey in the state fair and brought home a blue ribbon, the judge saying it tasted like sunshine and clover, and we laughed because that's exactly what Harlan always said about Clara's honey from the same hives 60 years earlier. We expanded the agritourism that fall, opening on weekends for pumpkin picking and hayrides, school buses rolling down the lane filled with city kids who'd never touched a real ear of corn or felt the velvet nose of a calf, and Grace and Caleb became the best tour guides you could ask for, explaining no-till farming and cover crops in words even first graders understood, while I served hot cider and oatmeal raisin cookies in the barn loft we turned into a little shop. People asked for the story every time, how a pregnant teenager showed up one snowy night and ended up owning the whole place, and I told it without shame now because it isn't a story of scandal anymore, it's a story of grace and doors opened and love that refused to stay small. And on quiet evenings when the work was done and the kids were asleep, I'd sit on the porch swing with baby Harlan on my lap, his tiny fingers tracing the carved initials HW plus CW that Harlan had etched into the armrest the year they got married, and I'd tell him about the great-grandpa he was named for, how he fought in Korea and came home to build this life, how he lost his wife too young and his heart stayed tender anyway, how he taught me that real strength isn't in never bending, it's in bending and not breaking, how he believed every person deserves a second chance because he'd needed a few himself. The winters came and went, each one a little milder or a little fiercer, but always ending in mud and then green and then harvest gold and then white again, and the farm grew in small steady ways, a new hoop building for wintering the cattle, a bigger garden with raised beds so my back didn't complain as much, a gravel pad for the RV when old friends from nursing school came to visit and parked under the oaks that we lost, a few old neighbors passed on the way folks do when you reach my age, but new families moved in, young couples with little ones starting their own stories on smaller acreages, and they came to us for advice on chickens or fencing or how to read the sky for weather, and we shared what Harlan had shared with us because that's how it works here, knowledge passed hand to hand, season to season, generation to generation. By 2030 Caleb had finished his AG engineering degree and come home full-time designing a methane digester that turned manure into electricity for the whole farm, and Grace was in vet school interning with the large animal practice that still made calls here, the same doctor who delivered Clara Bell the heifer all those years ago, now gray-haired and passing the stethoscope to the next generation. Sarah and Mark talked about semi-retirement, letting the kids take over more, but they still loved the daily work, the feel of soil under their boots, the satisfaction of bins full and cattle fat on grass, and I told them there's no shame in working the land as long as you love it. Age is just a number, the dirt doesn't care how old your knees are. And one December evening in 2032, snow falling thick and silent just like always, I sat in Harlan's old rocking chair by the window, the one he died in, watching the flakes pile up on the porch rail, and I realized 78 years had passed since that Christmas Eve when I walked up this same driveway half frozen and terrified, and now here I was warm and surrounded by more family than I could count, the lights still burning in the window, the door still ready to open if anyone needed it, the baby who would be the fifth generation slept upstairs, his name not yet chosen but already loved. And I thought about how Harlan used to say the land doesn't really belong to any of us, we're just borrowing it from our grandchildren and taking care of it for our grandparents, and he'd been right all along. This farm, this house, this family isn't an inheritance in the way the lawyer meant when he read the will. It's something bigger, something alive that keeps growing because someone once chose kindness over judgment, chose to make room at the table, chose to leave the light on, and as long as there's breath in me and in the ones who come after, we'll keep choosing that every single day, every single season, every single Christmas Eve when the snow falls and the wind howls and someone somewhere might be walking lost and cold, needing exactly what Harlan gave me all those years ago. A door opened wide, a fire burning bright, a voice saying, "Come in, child, there's room." The story doesn't end, it just keeps turning. Like the seasons, like the earth itself, round and round, from darkness to light, from winter to spring, from loss to fuller life than you ever thought possible, all because one farmer on one snowy night decided a stranger in trouble was worth saving. And that's the real legacy, the one no will can fully capture, the one that lives in every seed planted, every calf born, every hand extended, every light left burning against the dark, waiting for whoever needs it next. If you're loving these heartfelt, real-life stories from the American heartland, tales of redemption, family, forgiveness, and second chances that hit you right in the feels, then you don't want to miss a single one. Head over to my YouTube channel, Olive Stories, right now, hit that redid your node button, and turn on the bell notifications so you're the first to know when a new emotional roller coaster drops every day. We've got more of true stories just like this one, ordinary folks facing extraordinary moments that'll make you laugh, cry, and restore your faith in humanity. Join our amazing community of story lovers today. Subscribe. Come be part of the family. We'll save a spot for you around the virtual fireplace. Red Heart.